What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today, since we are only a few weeks away from Jedi Fallen Order, I did want to make a bit of a discussion video on a few of the reasons why I am pretty excited for the game, but also a few of the reasons why I'm actually a little bit nervous as well, essentially just like a pros and cons list for what we know so far. I'm sure everyone does already know, but for those who don't, Jedi Fallen Order is a single-player game developed by Respawn Entertainment and published by EA, set about 5 years after the events of Order 66 that we see unfold in Episode 3. The story follows the path of a young Padawan, or technically a former Padawan now, by the name of Cal Kestis, and it is set to release on November 15th this year, so almost exactly 3 weeks after this video goes live. Now, from what I can see, when it comes to this game, the fans seem to be split pretty evenly down the middle, with a lot of people being super excited for the game and another group of people being very cautious and wary about the release, due to the fact that it is of course being published by EA, who, let's be honest, don't really have the greatest reputation as of right now. So, like I said, today I just wanted to go through a few of the reasons for both sides of the argument, pretty much just playing devil's advocate on either side, and just giving some of you a few reasons why you should be cautious about the game, but also some solid reasons to be very excited as well. Now, I think the most important and probably the most pressing debate that I've seen is easily the whole EA drama, and so I do think that's probably the most important place to start with a video like this. Obviously, as of the last maybe 5 to 10 years now, EA has given themselves a pretty terrible reputation within the gaming community. Whether you love EA or hate them, I highly doubt anyone is going to say otherwise. Overall, between FIFA, Madden, Battlefield, and a few of their other games like Anthem, their reputation has just sort of been dwindling away with each release. However, when it comes to just the Star Wars side of things, it is probably even worse than it is for those other IPs. Battlefront 2015 was far from a bad game, but it did lack a lot of content, and it was also locked to one error, meaning there wasn't quite as much diversity as there should have been. Battlefront 2017 had much more content, but, well, we all know what happened at launch, and honestly, despite a huge turnaround and a pretty amazing comeback, the game really just never has and probably never will completely recover from its launch. Now, those are pretty much the only Star Wars games that EA has released in almost 7 years now, and on top of that, they actually cancelled another Star Wars game in late 2017, which was being developed by Visceral Games. So overall, you can see that they definitely haven't done their best with the Star Wars IP, considering how much power EA has and how big of a franchise Star Wars is, so that is definitely enough to get people a little worried. Now, with all that being said, the Battlefront games have been developed by DICE, whereas Fallen Order is actually being developed by Respawn, who are obviously owned by EA as well, but despite that, Respawn actually does have a really great reputation within the gaming community. Respawn are responsible for developing both Titanfall 1 and 2, which personally I've never really played much of, but overall those games have gotten really solid reviews and responses, and they are also the developers behind Apex Legends as well, which did have a fairly bumpy start, but overall it is another very solid game. Now, judging by the EA Star Wars games, yeah sure, there is definitely a lot to be worried about in regards to just their ever-dropping reputation and quality of the games at the moment, but if you take a look at Respawn on their own, they actually have a very decent reputation, and if any EA-owned company is going to pull this off, I'd say Respawn are probably the ones to do it. The other thing is that this is obviously a single-player game too, and I don't know for certain because I've never actually developed a game myself, but I'd imagine it is probably a lot harder to mess up a single-player game than it is to mess up a multiplayer game, especially when it comes to something like Star Wars. With a game like this, if the gameplay is decent, the story is enjoyable, and the characters are solid, then you're most likely going to get a pretty positive reaction from the fans, and therefore you can most likely consider the game a success if that was the case. With a multiplayer game though, the game could be perfect, but when you start playing against other human beings and they abuse certain metas and use all the stronger gear for example, you might hate the game, even though it's probably more the fault of the players doing those things rather than the game. So I do think the Fallen Order might be a little easier to do well, if that makes any sense. At the end of the day, this part of the discussion does all just come down to your own personal preference. If you really aren't a fan of EA, then it's probably understandable that you're going to be nervous or worried for the game, or if you're not as worried about the EA thing as a lot of others will, then you probably will be a little bit more excited for the game, and either way, there's really nothing wrong with that. Now, moving on from the EA discussion, there is a few reasons to be excited that can probably come under the same umbrella, those being the story and the cast that has been announced so far. As I mentioned earlier, the story will be set in between episodes 3 and 4, taking place in what's often referred to as the Dark Times, not long after the Jedi Order was essentially burned to the ground. For me personally, this is probably the most intriguing time frame in the whole Star Wars timeline, as I'm a huge fan of both the prequels and the OT, and pretty much any way to learn more of the story that bridges the gap between those two trilogies, I'm always going to be easily excited for something like that. The whole idea of any remaining Jedi being on the run from the Inquisitors is really exciting to me. That instantly adds a lot of tension and weight to the story, and so like I said, when they announced that it would be set in this time frame, that was probably the main thing that stood out to me as the most gripping aspect that we've learned so far. Now, on top of that, there are also some really solid casting, such as Cameron Monaghan, who plays Cal, the main character, who, for those that don't know, is actually fairly popular for his role as the Joker in the TV show Gotham, and even the likes of Forrest Whitaker reprising his role as Saw Gerrera, which actually then raises another really interesting question. Which other characters from Star Wars could actually make an appearance in this game? Saw Gerrera obviously fits well into the story because he was one of the characters that really helped set up the rebellion in a way, and that makes me wonder whether at any point we might come across any other characters aligned with the Rebel Alliance, characters like Bail Organa or even Mon Mothma. Obviously those two weren't quite as involved in the action as Saw was, but there's no reason that people like that couldn't make an appearance along with a lot of others that I didn't name either. On the other side of that, could we maybe see Vader and Palpatine at any point through the game, maybe the Grand Inquisitor, or just really any of the other Inquisitors for that matter? There are a lot of questions in that regard, and at least for me anyway, that does add a lot of intrigue to the story and the game overall. Now, I'm honestly not expecting any of those characters, so I will say that you shouldn't really get your hopes up too high, but like I said, there's no reason that some established characters can't make it into the game, so that is definitely something to be a little bit excited for. Now, lastly, the main thing that I think could really help sell the game is whether or not the gameplay and mainly the combat is of high quality. Judging by the trailers and the gameplay that we've seen, I'm not going to say that it looks bad by any means, but at the same time, I honestly don't think it looks all that great either. For me, that's going to be a pretty big selling point. I'm going to be buying the game anyway because I am pretty keen, but more in terms of whether or not I'll end up liking the game, the combat is a massive part of it. One thing that does give me hope though is that most of the game changers who have been able to test the game early all said the combat felt much better than they expected from seeing the gameplay. And we do also have to remember that the gameplay we saw was only Alpha 2, so I guess we can't really put too much pressure on it in that regard. I spoke to Elliot from Battlefront Updates a few months ago on my podcast, and I will leave a link down in the description for those who want to check it out, saying that he was really pleased with the gameplay, even though when he saw the gameplay that we all saw, he wasn't 100% certain about it. And to sort of paraphrase, he went on to mention that the different combos and movement all felt like you actually had a lot of control and that there was actually weight to the decisions that you made during combat. For me, that does definitely give me a sense of relief, as like I said earlier, the gameplay we saw was a little bit hit and miss for me. Some of it looked really great and some of it looked a little bit the opposite, so hearing Elliot along with just about all the others who got to play saying that it felt a little different than it looked, that is at least one upside to the combat overall, and hopefully since they've obviously been working on it a lot since then, the combat will be really well polished by the time the game releases. But that is pretty much going to do it for this one, guys. Ever since the game was announced, I've gotten so many mixed comments of either don't buy this game, it's going to be terrible, or people saying that they're extremely excited and that it's going to be the best game of all time. And the point of this video is essentially just to play devil's advocate for both sides of that argument, and just kind of touch on a few of the positives and the negatives for a few of those different talking points. If you guys do want to see more Fallen Order videos leading up to release as well as obviously after release, then make sure to smash that like button, and if you have any specific videos you would like me to make once the game releases, such as walkthroughs, achievement guides, or pretty much just anything at all, then definitely let me know down in the comments. If you are new to the channel, then feel free to subscribe and turn on your notifications so you don't miss out on any more Star Wars gaming videos or live streams. Thank you all so much for watching, you guys have a great day and I'll catch you all in the next one.